Keith and I go back a long way, and I'm delighted that he's chairing this important conference today. The other thing I want to say to Robert and to the whole of EDAS is that this is very timely, very appropriate, and very relevant. We have a situation where our date with DES today is the 18th of September, but my first and main point is that, look, I see in the post-war period, especially after the 60s, a union in decline. It's manifest in a variety of ways. But I see a Scotland post-99 in terms of devolution with a different mood, different momentum, different set of purposes, and going forward. So regardless of what happens on the 18th, I'm firmly convinced that Scotland needs to drive forward. And in some respects, in books that I've been involved in and written over the past few years, I've always maintained that the destiny of Scotland will be decided by the Union in Westminster, not Edinburgh and the SNP or nationalism. And what I mean then is that there's a vortex just now of issues and factors circulating around the electors, a lot of them nothing to do with Scotland being independent, but much to do with a sense of concern about what's happening down south and with the Union. Now that provides a very powerful, dangerous cocktail for those who want to see no happen on the 18th. But I think what EDS has captured today is that there is life beyond where we're going, and to me, that should focus our minds much more. If a country is moving forward, we certainly don't know the destination of our travel, but we certainly know the direction. And if we do that, there is a basis, I hear common good, common ground, yes, to build forward. Because when we did devolution in 1997, there was a grudging consensus on the part of even the Conservatives. The SNP changed and supported devolution as a step towards independence, but there was a consensus. There was some realization that the point had come that administrative devolution had to now give way to political devolution. There is none of that consensus around in Scotland. The country is divided. The political parties, two of them at least, are bitterly divided with a series of angst and discourtesy which doesn't really augur well for politics generally. But to me, having no consensus when you're about to take one of the biggest decisions, possibly since we lost the colonies way back in the 18th century from the Union, this is dramatic. It's absolutely enormous in relation to every citizen in Scotland, but in a way in Northern Ireland, England and Wales as well. So the importance of this cannot be overstated, and that's why I want to try very briefly this morning, just to give you, in a discursive way, my kind of insights into where the campaign is, my insights into vision, or the lack of it, and then to identify some characteristics of the future Scotland that no matter whether we're in or out, we actually have to pursue with a great deal more enthusiasm, a great deal more urgency, and a great deal more vigour than we've been currently doing. So in that respect, EDAS is doing us a favour, and I just sincerely hope, Robert, that the organisation will continue to give a lead on this so that we can bring together people from different backgrounds, different industries, different economies, local government, right across the board to actually articulate an actual way forward. But first of all, what I'd like to do is to look at the campaign itself, and this, in a way, I hope will reinforce the position that you're taking. First of all, we have an incredibly narrow prospectus. I always argued for a second question on the ballot paper, because currently we've got independence, and independence in a very interdependent world, against unionism. And the important point about the unionism argument is that what we've seen recently is a bidding up. And it seems to me that the unionist parties are vying with each other to find as little as they can do to buy that vote with a no in September. So we had devolution 99, I think was a substantial Scotland Act, great white paper, most of it due to the astonishing ability of Donald Dewar. We then in 2012 had devolution phase 2. Now we've got a bidding war about devolution phase 3. And when you think about it, surely you cannot have detailed powers more of detailed taxation powers, more of, if you don't actually have a vision as to why they're required. So it seems to me that the unionist position is suspect because they want to say, if you vote no, we'll certainly give you more powers. Here's a joint statement to say we'll give you more powers, but of course we don't know what will happen in 2015. But the main point is, how can you have those powers, bit more of this, bit more of that, when indeed, why are the powers needed? And the second point I would stress is that the public I speak to, they don't talk about powers. They don't talk about 30% tax leverage as against 40% tax leverage. I think the debate has gone well beyond that. And so as a consequence, it seems to me that the unionist parties are in grave danger of actually being involved in a bidding war which actually doesn't have a great deal of relevance because most Scots, including this audience, I'm sure, have moved beyond the 18th to actually think what is on hand for us. The second point is, in terms of the campaign, it's tribal. Hey, and that's part of politics. But this is not a battle between SNP and Labour. This is actually a battle for the future of Scotland within the Union or out with the Union. It seems an obvious trite point to make, but it puzzles me greatly that we've reduced this to a kind of hatred between the two parties. And if you notice when they're being interviewed, and this is both sides, there is an edge, there's a kind of ugliness to the debate, which is basically saying we're right. Now, in this campaign, there has to be more grey than black and white. But Westminster will come up, and we've had a string of them, including Barroso, John Major yesterday. You know, if you don't vote no, then plagues of locusts, aliens, famines will visit you. Now, we know it's nonsense. But it's a tactical position that's being deployed at that particular time. On the other hand, as part of the SNP and the Nationalists and the Yes Vote campaign, is to overplay their hand. And Europe was a classic example. Europe has a process, and if you're an independent country, a nation state, you can join. You can apply to join. There's a pre-accession, there's an accession, there's a post-accession process. But what do? We say, well, it'll be a doddle, to use a Scottish phrase. No problem. So it is, we're independent, bang, fine. So that was overplayed, and as a consequence allowed people then to come in and overplay it again. So I think in terms of this tribalism, I think Scots are wise to that. I think thirdly, the campaign is shallow and superficial. What about the fact that the UK doesn't have a written constitution? What about the fact that England has really not been treated seriously? Although most people assumed when we were incorporated into the English Parliament in 1707, you know, that just followed that England had its own parliament anyway. But when you look at some of the narrow horizons, you do think this is a Scottish issue, but it's not. What we're doing, other European countries take for granted. If you look at Germany, if you look at Belgium, you look at a whole range of countries, this idea that a bit of devolution is earth-shattering, no. It's not. It's part of governance, it's part of governments evolving, and in that sense, our debate ignores history, our debate ignores serious politics that are taking place in Europe, and our debate, I think, doesn't grasp the fact this is not just about Scotland, it's about the Union. The fourth point I want to stress about the campaign is the Union response, and I've made that point about the bidding up of powers and tax concessions when, in fact, we don't have any particular vision. So, in that sense, I think the vision of the SNP is incomplete. I think the vision of the UK, of the Union, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is very difficult to find. And the reason for that, I think, is simple. If you accept a thesis, and you can read Tom Devine, you could read Linda Colley, there's a whole string of books which actually come to some agreement that the Union has been declining for some time. We've had shared history, we've had shared achievement, but when you listen to the Union position, what about the future? What about the future? Now, whether you buy into Alex Salmond's vision or not, it is a vision. And as you hear Derek Mackay quite eloquently spelling out economically, it's viable, it's sustainable, let's get on with it. But what's the vision for the Union? Apart from the fact that we've been together for 307 years. We've been together, and in wartime, we've succeeded. So we have a great legacy, but we don't have any vision for the future. And then this is where essentially the trouble comes. Because, and I have to be slightly partisan here, hopefully you haven't thought I've been partisan up to now, but when I look down south, I get quite scared about what's happening politically there. I see what's happening in the EU. I'm embarrassed by what the government are doing. I'm morally vexed by the fact that immigrants and welfare scroungers are the new scapegoats. I'm really concerned about UKIP. It's a party that stands for nothing, but lives off the discontent that uncertainty, austerity, risk about the future creates. I'm concerned that enough Conservative MPs want to jump into bed with UKIP so we can carry on this ideological battle beyond the next election. So these are all issues for me that kind of worry. But then I say to myself, well, that's why the union doesn't have a vision. The union doesn't have the confidence just now. It can't have a vision. And if you take this nonsense about the Magna Carta, I thought it was a great point on Radio 4 this morning, a document written in Latin for a king who spoke French, and it was dumped about 15 minutes after it had been signed. But all of a sudden, we are the creators of democracy, law, and whatever. It must make some of the European countries shudder, and even the good US, who at least have a constitution and a Bill of Rights that espouse all those values. Look at what's happening in Birmingham about Islam. I'm not a great supporter of free schools or academies, but are we not destroying education in our hunt for terrorists? And how many are actually lurking in Birmingham schools? The EU idea will have a referendum in or out. Then there's Scotland. So it seems to me that there's a very real problem for the union in this lack of confidence and having a lack of vision at the present time. So for me then, we have some hard choices to make. And one of the things that's interested me recently is this book just published, Small Nations in a Big World, What Scotland Can Learn, by Michael Keating and Malcolm Harvey. And this is essentially taking our parochial debate and putting it into a European context. And so in terms of if we're looking for models for the future, and these are highly simplistic, around them there are multiple variations, I see a Scotland ahead, and in a curious way, in or out of the Union, which actually does four things. One is, in economic terms, it creates what is widely known as the social investment model, to be compared with a kind of classical liberal market model. Examples in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Nordic countries, they can be described in a way as social investment states. The Baltic countries, new from the failed Soviet Union, actually embracing more of a market-led economy. So the first thing is here, the SNP's vision is incomplete because, to be fair in politics, you want to be all things to all men and to all women. But in reality, Ireland tried this, to be a bit of Baltic, a bit of Scandinavia, a bit of Nordic, and join the social investment model with a kind of neoliberal classical model. Now, it can work. Nothing's black and white. There are shades of grey. But I think my first concern for Scotland is that we need to move on to a much more moral economy, a much more moral society. I think we have to deepen our values, and we have to have something better, as the Minister actually said, than just measuring GDP, rather than measuring humanity, happiness, and a whole string of other issues. So in that sense, and I'll maybe elaborate on the social investment state in a minute, but it seems to me that we can advocate. Now, the real problem here, of course, is, if I ask myself the question then, can Scotland achieve that? My answer would probably be yes. Can the Union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland achieve it against the background of what I've said to you? I don't think they can. So this is a bit lopsided in a way, because we're creating a test for the Union that it might not be able to pass. The second point that I would like to stress in terms of politics, and I'm very critical of my own party in that regard, a lot of parties have abandoned social democracy. Now again, it's a large, widely loose concept, but it's all about egalitarianism. It's all about the collective good. It's all about looking at the morality. So social democracy is a powerful voice in Europe. It used to be a powerful voice in Scotland and the UK, but my concern is that it's vastly diminishing. So in that sense, if you have an economic model, which is about social investment state, And that's two things. One is the state and its public expenditure is taken seriously. It's not a burden. It's actually a liberator. But of course, if you look at the Scandinavian model, and this is not too popular a thing to be saying before a referendum, it could involve tax increases. And my question, in a way, we have got ourselves into a position in the UK where nobody talks about tax. You mustn't increase taxes. Why? I'm sure there's a rational debate about competitiveness and a whole range of things. But on the other hand, some small countries do extraordinarily well. But you wouldn't like to swallow overnight. They take on the public purse the figures in some of the Scandinavian countries I've just mentioned. The third factor for me, in terms of the social investment model, social democracy, is the whole question of society and social partnership. We have a ramshackle approach to business, trade unions, working together. Now, people will say, well, we tried that in the 60s and tried that in the 70s and it all failed, this kind of, statism, collectivism. No, we haven't. But again, you can look to other countries to see that there is a model which brings people together. And again, on the basis that there's maybe more to life than bankers' bonuses and GDP figures. And the final point for me then is what kind of contract, what kind of social contract is any of the two campaigns offering the Scottish people? Now, I've given you a biased view of the future, in my view, because it reflects my, I was going to say nearly 100 years, but 44 years in Labour politics, 30 years in elected politics, 10 years outside looking in on politics. But I do believe that the whole of the political process has reached a watershed, that a lot of political parties don't stand for anything. Young people are disconnected, the public are disillusioned. That's part of the UKIP fantasy that a lot of people are indulging in. So we've reached a bit of a watershed in terms of general politics. But if you then put this question of a social investment model, a social democratic model, a social partnership model, leading to a very different kind of society, then to me, I find that attractive. Now, clearly, presenting that in the debate can be difficult because there are some grueling questions that can be asked about the model I'm presenting. But my plea is, let's have something which talks about a vision, which you can agree with or disagree with or partly accept and link it with something else. And currently, I understand why the SNP are doing it, but the SNP, in a sense, have got to, in my view, be a bit more focused as to what's on offer. Because as I go around Scotland, I find that a lot of people I speak to who are no voters want Scotland to be successful, and they know they can be independent. But what's happening in their minds is, and this is a classic ploy in a campaign, and it's tactics that you can't talk against, uncertainty breeds fear, and people are anxious about the future. So if you speak to people on pensions, on whether North Sea oil does what the First Minister says it does, you find that people have got a hankering with their heart, and they like the modern Scotland. They like the idea that devolution has worked. They like closeness. They see the Nordic model, not in great detail, but it's kind of over there, and it could be helpful. But they're fearful. And it was, the Roosevelt who made the point, sometimes there's nothing to fear but fear itself. So I just believe that for the remaining part of the campaign, we should, in fact, be looking at strengthening the vision if you're a yes campaigner, and actually finding a vision if you're a no campaigner. And I genuinely think the weakness of the no campaign and why it's hemorrhaging is people are beginning to get slightly fed up by the locust plagues and aliens campaign, as I said, John Major illustration yesterday, and actually beginning to think, after 14 years of devolution, 15 years, we feel slightly better about our own country. Nationality and identity are beginning to fuse. There is a different perspective that we can have, although we don't see all the, the T's crossed and the I's dotted. And that's why I think that as we run up to the 18th, we should be buoyed by the fact that no matter what happens, Scotland is going to have a much, much bigger future. And my plea to the Union is this: it's not going to go away. If there's a bidding process to see the minimum we can get off with at Westminster to get a no vote, That will be challenged in 2:15 at Westminster, at 2:16 at Holyrood. So the really strong point for us is Scotland is on this incredible journey, and it's not going to be deviated from where it wants to be. And so therefore, it could be independence. It could be independence linked to a confederation with the Union. It could be a federalist Britain, and I think to be fair to the Liberals, they've been consistent in that from the early part of the last century. And of course, even the Conservatives are now talking, maybe for different reasons, about substantial devolution. So in that sense, I think the future looks bright, and it does. And I think what we need to do is collectively get together and make sure that we can move over that transition period. Can I just finally then come further down to talk about some of the issues that have been raised in relation to Scotland? If it's a yes vote, there's not going to be a seamless transition to a country flowing with milk and honey. That's self-evident. There's going to be a long process of change and uncertainty and some difficult, hard choices to actually make. But it seems to me there are certain things that are clear. First of all, in terms of demographics, they cannot be lightly dismissed. We have a good health service in Scotland. We have good progressive policies like personal care. But we are looking at a sizable increase of something like 1.9 million people over 60 and 65 to something like 2.4 million. Not so far ahead. That is going to be not only a financial challenge to us, but a moral challenge. Do we want to get to the point where we see people going into private residential care homes and being treated in that way? Or is there a moral ethos which says we need to spend more money? And somebody had this great idea, I think it was a guy writing for The Independent, says, everybody looks to referendums now because big decision taken out of the hands of politicians. Why don't we have a referendum sometime in the Union about spending more money in the National Health Services? Hypothecated. Would it win? I think it would. So demographics are absolutely crucial, and that's not an easy one for any minister or anyone to talk through. The second point, which I'm heavily involved in, is human capital. We have no shipbuilding of any great distinction now. We have no coal, we have no steel. We haven't got the resources that actually built industrial Scotland and contributed so much to the empire. But what we've got, and the government don't use it in this phrase, we've got the best renewable resource on the planet, and it completes itself generationally every year, people. But we're underutilising it. We don't spend enough on education, and I'm even acknowledging we live in austere times, but that's no excuse for the fact that we need to be spending far more, not just in schools, but in colleges and universities, but linking them all together. We've got a continuum for the future where we can take talent, develop it, and every child has a brain. Some develop at different stages, some need special help. But lifelong learning, the idea of human capital, it's our only way forward. So in that sense, it should not only just be ring-fenced, money from other priorities in government should go into human capital. And to me, that's the second thing. The third thing is that I don't think we're half as good as we think we are in terms of innovation. We've often got far too much of a dependency mind. And hey, I'm a product of that. I mean, to be honest with you, it's like playing snooker for all your life. And some people think if you're in politics, that's about the equivalent value that society gets out of it. But, I think that in that sense, it's absolutely vital that, we look upon contributions that are made, and we look about contributions that should be made. And one of the areas that strikes me as important here is the whole question of SIMD, to use a technical term, and education inequality and poverty and deprivation. We're all paying for poverty. It's not just the poor that suffer from poverty. So what on earth are we going to do about it? Inequality, I think, is poisoning the well of Scottish society. Some people, some parties may want to make that a political issue by distractions and scapegoats, but for me, unlike the Nordic countries, where there is a more humane view of taking of life and prisoners and whatever, we live in a society where inequality is absolutely massive, and the figures are, you cannot dispute them in terms of we, the UK and the US, are some of the most unequal societies in Western developed worlds. So in that sense, I think that inequality for me, unless it's tackled effectively and efficiently, then that's going to be a problem for Scotland. But in terms of that, we need innovative ideas. And this is the point I was making just a few seconds ago, that where is the innovation? I'm far too dependent on the public sector. I've lived my life in politics. I'm still in education. I'm too dependent. I'm too dependent on somebody else saying, this is what you do. And so are we all. So part of the innovation, the enterprise model, is to actually try and break that link. This government in Scotland is too centralised. We now have one police force, one fire service. Logically, you can take every service that local government provides and run it from Holyrood. Does that make any sense? Well, it loses democratic thread. You could be saving money. So in terms of this innovation, this dependency culture issue, I think we've got to break free of that pretty soon. And that, again, is whether we're in or out after the 18th of March. And I suppose the final point, I think Robert referred to it earlier, and I think the Minister, that in basic things like productivity, competitiveness, business creation, we compare ourselves with the regions of England, but actually the regions of England compared with other parts of Europe and the US don't compare much at all. So I think we've got to be careful about the analogies we deploy to make sure that our figures are looking quite good. On those big issues, we are not doing well, and we could be doing better. So I see a future which, I'm an eternal optimist, someone who's been involved in trying to save the prison service, save Scottish football, has to be an eternal optimist. And I enjoy it. And I look forward to the future of Scotland with great hope, whatever the result is. But what I've tried to spell out today is that anyone in the No campaign who thinks this is a slam dunk, to use an American phrase, is a million miles from the truth. This could be the first time in recorded politics where a slam dunk has been converted into a known goal. Now, that's a hellish mixing of metaphors, but I think you get what I mean. I think you get what I mean. So good luck to them, good luck to the Yes campaign, but the interests of EDAS, the interests of myself, it's the interests of Scotland. Thanks very much for listening.